Thank you, Sunil. I am Michael Hodgkinson, lead researcher on the 2021 Arab Youth Survey, and I will now take you through the methodology of our survey. The 13th annual ASDAR BCW Arab Youth Survey was conducted by international research firm PSB Insights to explore the hopes, the dreams, and the aspirations of Arabs aged 18 to 24. This year, our interviewers covered 50 cities in 17 Arab states to gain a representative view of youth and ensure the highest quality in data collection. A total of 3,400 interviews were carried out in June 2021 and were split equally between male and female citizens of each country. All of our interviews were conducted face-to-face with young Arabs. Since the study started in 2008, we have interviewed face-to-face over 35,000 young Arabs from across the region as part of the Arab Youth Survey. This continues to be a key differentiator of our study, which ensures the highest quality insights. This year, we covered 17 Arab states in 3 regional groups. First, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, including Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Second, the Levant and others, covering Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestinian territories, Syria, as well as Yemen. And third, North Africa, which reached out to nationals in Algeria, in Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, and Tunisia. Through our survey, we include both the main population centers of each country, as well as the capital cities. For example, in the UAE, respondents were drawn from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah. In Saudi Arabia, we do our respondents from Riyadh, from Jeddah, and from Dammam. In Egypt, half our interviews took place in Cairo, and a quarter each in Alexandria and Mansoura. In Lebanon, interviews took place in Beirut, in Saida, and in Tripoli. And in the Palestinian territories, we split our interviews equally between the West Bank and Gaza. And as you can see, we have equal splits across other countries as well. Such a geographic spread gives us a representative picture of the attitudes of Arab youth across the region. I now invite Sunil to present the top findings. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Michael. For the past 18 months, the world has been going through one of the most uncertain times due to the pandemic. The Arab world was no exception. It is in such an uncertain environment that we conducted our survey this year. And what came out was a surprising finding, a message of hope for the future from young Arabs. Our survey finds that despite the pandemic, ongoing conflicts, and record economic decline, most Arab youth are optimistic that their best days lie ahead of them. Now, let us look at how we arrived at that finding. When we asked young Arabs whether they believed their best days lay ahead or behind them, an astonishing 60% expressed optimism for the future, saying their best days lie ahead. Incredibly, this confidence now is higher than it was in 2020 before the pandemic. In fact, optimism of young Arabs in their future is now at the highest level in the last 5 years. We further asked young Arabs whether they believe they will have a better life than their parents, and we were surprised at the optimism that it continued to shine through. In 2021, nearly half of young Arabs, all of 48%, said they will have a better life than their parents, compared to only 41% in 2020 and 45% in 2019. We then asked specifically about how young Arabs feel about their national economy. Was it going in the right direction, or were they disappointed with the state of the economy? Our survey finds that Arab youth's optimism about the direction of their national economies has improved since 2020. This year, 48%, nearly half of young Arabs, said their national economies were headed in the right direction. This is a 5 percentage point increase from 2020. However, optimism about the economy has not yet recovered to 2019 levels, which peaked at 53%. My colleague Gina will now take us through the next finding.
Thank you, Sunil. I am Ghina Aitani. We have discussed the outlook of young Arabs, and there is optimism about their future. But what are their concerns? What do they see as hindering their own and their nation's progress? Our survey finds that the rising cost of living and other kitchen table issues are seen as the top obstacles. We asked young Arabs across the region about the real issues they are concerned about. As you can see in this chart, 89% of young Arabs pointed to rising cost of living as their top concern. This is followed by the impact of COVID-19, a key concern for 88% of young Arabs. 87% were concerned about the quality of education, and 84% said they are concerned about unemployment. Next, we ask about their own personal finances. How easy is it for young Arabs to pay their expenses? Were they able to save? As you can see in the chart, more than a third, which is 37% of Arab youth, said they usually struggle to pay their expenses in full. 42% said they can meet their expenses but are unable to save. And only 21%, that is just 1 in 5 young Arabs, said they were able to cover their expenses and have some money left for savings. As you can see in the chart on the right, across the region, we see a clear difference. While 56% of youth in the Levant and 37% in North Africa said they struggled to meet their expenses, only 13% of young Arabs in the GCC region said so. I now invite Muhannad to discuss two critical concerns shared by Arab youth: education and jobs.
Thank you, Rina. I'm Muhannad, and I will take you through the perception of Arab youth regarding the quality of higher education and unemployment. Our study brings a very insightful finding. With difficulties in accessing quality higher education and jobs, more and more young Arabs are now turning to entrepreneurship. So we specifically asked young Arabs how concerned they were about the quality of education in their country. And what we found is that 87%, so about 9 in 10 young Arabs, expressed concern with the quality of education. This view is consistent across all the 3 regions that we surveyed, with 85% of youth in the GCC and 88% of youth in both North Africa and the Levant expressing dissatisfaction. When the quality of education suffers, it also has an impact on securing jobs. According to the World Bank, youth unemployment in the region is at 25%, which is almost double the global average. The pandemic has further aggravated the situation. When we asked about the impacts of the pandemic on jobs, a third of young Arabs said either they or a family member had lost a job due to the pandemic. And getting another job hasn't been easy. Nearly 2/3, so 63%, said neither they nor their relative had been able to find a new job. We also asked young Arabs about their preferred future careers. Most Arab youth said they choose to work for the government. Notably, there has been a decline in the preference for government jobs, from 49% back in 2019 to 42% this year. And at the same time, the desire to work for themselves or their family has increased, as you can see in the second bar chart, from 16% in 2019 to 25% now. The preference of young Arabs for private sector jobs has also declined, from 28 to 23% over the last 3 years. So, what do these findings on education and jobs tell us? With about 127 million young Arabs expected to join the workforce by 2040, it is important to address the twin challenges of education and job creation. I now invite Samih to discuss our next finding.
Thank you, Muhannad. I am Samih Hamtini, and I will discuss our finding on the role of government. This is a very important finding for decision makers to set policies that support youth empowerment. Our finding on the role of government is positive and will inspire policymakers, as young Arabs say their voice matters to their leadership. When we asked whether youth believe their voice matters to leadership, nearly 3/4, 72% of young Arabs said, yes, our voice matters. This view is shared by a majority of young people in the GCC at 88%. As you can see in the callouts, a majority of youth in North Africa and the Levant also believe their voice matters. Our survey has already highlighted that job creation and quality education are top priorities of young Arabs. So, we also asked, what must your governments do to support job creation? And they pinpointed 3 top priorities: tackle nepotism, known as wasta in the Arab world, provide more information on the job opportunities available, and reform the education sector. A number of other factors were considered, which you can see in the chart, but these are the 3 most important. As you may recall, another key insight from our survey was that more young Arabs wanted to be entrepreneurs. So we asked Arab youth across the 17 countries, what should your government do to promote a culture of entrepreneurship? As you can see in the chart, young Arabs firstly want governments to provide easier access to finance through government guaranteed loans, encouraging affordable lending for startups, and cutting unnecessary regulation and red tape to promote entrepreneurship across the Arab world. I now invite my colleague Reem to present a significant milestone in our survey.
Thank you, Samah. I am Reem Diab, and I'm here to present our finding on model nations. Since 2012, we have been asking young Arabs which country they want to live in the most, and which country they wanted their own nation to emulate. And for the 10th consecutive year, Arab youth have named the UAE as their model nation. So let's look at the numbers. When we asked which country they want to live in, nearly half, 47% of young Arabs chose the UAE. This is more than double the number of young Arabs, 19%, who picked their second choice, the United States. Canada came in third at 15%, France fourth with 13%, and Germany fifth, chosen by 11%. On the right side, you can see the historical trend, and it is clear that for the last 10 years, the UAE has been the first choice for Arabs to live in. Next, we asked which country young Arabs saw as their model nation, the country they want their own to emulate. Once again, the UAE was the top choice of young Arabs, with nearly half, 46%, naming it as the model nation. The UAE is followed by the United States, chosen by 28%, while Canada and Germany were selected by 12% of young Arabs as nations to be emulated. And France was selected by another 11%. As the chart on the right shows, the UAE has been the model nation for Arab youth over the last 10 years. This is great news for the nation, which is currently celebrating its 50th anniversary. I now invite Michael to share another important finding.
Thank you, Reem. I will now share with you one of the findings that tends to get the greatest interest both within the region and internationally, that on foreign policy. This year, we see quite clearly that Arab youth are looking to 3 countries as key allies. The first, Egypt, the second, the UAE, and the third, Saudi Arabia. But when we ask them about which countries wield the greatest influence within the region, it's the United States that comes top. Now, firstly, we asked Arab youth which countries they see as allies and which countries they see as enemies of their own. Looking at the chart here, we can see that 3 countries tend to do very well in that area. The first is Egypt, where 85% of Arab youth across the region see Egypt as an ally of their country. The next, UAE, where 83% of Arab youth see the UAE as an ally of their own country. And lastly, Saudi Arabia, where 80% of Arab youth see Saudi Arabia as an ally of their country. After these 3, we have China, the first country from outside the region, where 79% of Arab youth say China is an ally of theirs, followed by Russia with 72%, France with 70%, Turkey with 67%, and the United Kingdom with 66%. If we look historically at 3 of those countries, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the US, we see quite a different picture. In the case of the UAE, in the green bar, they have remained a steady ally for Arab youth across the past 5 years. So back in 2017, 79% of Arab youth said they saw the UAE as an ally. That has remained relatively consistent. At this point, 83% of Arab youth see the UAE as an ally. If we look at the blue bar, Saudi Arabia, 71% saw them an ally as back in 2017. And that's actually increased slightly. So this year, 80% of Arab youth view Saudi Arabia as an ally of their own country. But lastly, if we look at the US, there's a slightly different picture. So back in 2017, only 46% of Arab youth saw the US as an ally, and that decreased in the following years, both in 2018 and 2019. This increased in 2020, and since the election of President Biden at the end of last year, we've actually not seen a big difference. So there's been a similar level of Arab youth seeing the US as an ally last year to this year. Now, moving away from allies and enemies and looking instead at the amount of influence these countries wield, it's quite clear that the United States is still recognized as the country that has the greatest influence on the region. 51% of Arab youth select the United States as either the country with the most or the second most influence, followed by Saudi Arabia at 29% and the UAE at 23%. So those are the 3 countries that Arab youth see as wielding the most influence across the region. Now I will hand over to Nadal to talk to you about emigration. Over to you, Nadal.
Thank you, Michael. I am Nadal Al-Asad. Last year, a top finding of our survey was about immigration, when surprisingly, nearly half of the Arab youth said they were trying to immigrate to another country. This year, once again, we asked the same question. Have you considered immigration? The answer is that there is a slight shift in the mood. This year, fewer Arabs are considering immigration despite the ongoing economic challenges in their countries. As you can see in the top chart, 1/3 of respondents, 33% said they are trying to immigrate, compared to 42% last year. Down, you can also see the regional split. The highest percentage of Arab youth wanting to immigrate comes from Levant at 42%, but this has fallen significantly from 63% last year. In North Africa, 40% of young Arabs consider immigration, a smaller decrease from last year's 7 points. In the GCC, fewer young people wanted to immigrate, just 13%, similar to last year. Now moving to country split. The desire to immigrate is highest among young people in Sudan, Morocco, and Lebanon. Our survey finds that 2/3, 68% of young Sudanese, 56% of young Moroccans, and 48% of Lebanese youth are considering immigration. We asked those Arabs who were considering immigration where they want to go. Canada and the United States were cited as the top destinations for young Arabs who are considering immigration. Germany, the UAE, and France are the next 3 popular destinations. So what drives young Arabs to consider immigration? 27% of young Arabs said their decision was influenced by economic reasons. Another 17% are looking for new educational opportunity, while 16% said they want to experience something new and different. And finally, 15% said they were frustrated with corruption and in their countries. And another 8% said their country lacks personal freedom. The message of the Arab youth to policymakers is very clear. If you want to keep your best talent in your home countries, remove the barriers in the way of progress. Now, let me invite my colleague Rawan to share a very interesting finding. Over to you, Rawan.
Thank you, Nidal. I'm Rawan Al-Husban. I will share with you our survey findings on identity. We asked, what are the factors that influence young Arabs in defining their personal identity? And our finding is that fewer young Arabs see religion as central to their identity. We asked young Arabs to identify what was most important to them. And over a third of young Arabs said religion is most important. But there has been a decline in the importance they place on faith in shaping their personal identity. As you can see from the chart, compared to 40% who said religion was most important in 2020, this year it has dropped to 34%. As the second and third bar chart show, the number of young Arabs who said their family or tribe and their nationality as most important has increased this year. Given the importance of religion to us, young Arabs, we asked whether they agree or disagree that their religious institutions should reform. And 2/3 of young Arabs said they would like their religious institutions to reform. As you can see in the call-outs, this is the highest among young Arabs in North Africa at 76%, followed by the GCC at 68% and Levant at 60%. I now invite Myrna to present our last key finding.
Thank you, Rawan. I'm Myrna Hamoud. In 2020, one of our key findings was that a majority of young Arab women said they have the same rights as men. This made global headlines. This year, there has been a change. More young Arab women now point to a fall in gender equality across the region. We asked young Arab women whether they believe they have the same, more, or less rights than men in their country. This year, 51% of Arab women believe they have the same rights as men. This has fallen significantly from 64% who felt the same way in 2020. Young Arab women in the GCC are most likely to believe they have the same rights as men, followed by North Africa and the Levant. Correspondingly, there has been an increase in the number of women believing men have more rights than them. This year, 40% of women said men have more rights than they do, compared to 25% in 2020. The confidence of young Arab women on ease of access to jobs has also decreased. As you can see, last year, 52% of all young Arab women said they had the same professional opportunities as men. This year, it has dropped to 46%. In fact, a similar number, 44%, now believe men have better job opportunities than women. Finally, we asked young Arabs, both men and women, their views on whether women benefit their families most by working. 74% of young Arab women and 63% of young Arab men said a woman can benefit her family most by working either part or full-time. but the number of young Arab men who said a working woman can benefit her family dropped since 2020 from 70 to 63%. These are the top findings we wanted to share with you today. More insights are shared on our website, arabyouthsurvey.com. We will move to a panel discussion to give additional context to the findings. I now hand over to Sunil, who will moderate the session. Thank you all.